in which we find ourselves, the word crisis keeps coming to mind. So I finally looked it up. And here's the definition. I think I know why it kept coming to mind. Crisis: a stage in a sequence of events at which the trend of all future events, especially for better or for worse, is determined. A stage in a sequence of events at which the trend of all future events is determined. There's a lot of determining going on in my life right now. I feel like I'm being forced to a tipping point. A tipping point in the way I perceive and respond to the world, to life, to others. The way I act and react now seems weightier, more consequential, to reference the definition again, in setting the trend of all future events in my life. Now, my immediate, honest response to all this is that I don't like it. Like Dr. John sings, I don't like it one bit. I like routine, predictability, constancy, stability, even keel. That's me. I'm a 9, I think they say. My favorite line, or one of my favorite lines in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, is Uncle Billy saying, breakfast at 8, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. I like routine. So I haven't known what to do with all of this. But I'm hopeful. I may have found some clues in the experience of Cleopas and his friend in our gospel today. They were clearly in a crisis, the stage in their lives at which the trend of all future events was being determined. They had hoped for redemption, for life. Their hope for redemption and for life had been executed. And now, 3 days later, there was a rumor that he was alive again. They were walking and talking about this when Jesus arrived, unbeknownst to them, and joined them. This makes me wonder, is there a connection between talking about what's happening in my life and Jesus showing up? It got me thinking more. How much do I honestly talk about what's happening in my life in true conversation with others? And the few times I risk doing that, who shows up? But to continue with the story, what good is it for Jesus to show up if I don't recognize him? We are told they were prevented from recognizing him. What prevented them from recognizing him? What might have distracted them from talking honestly about their lives? Were they checking their news feeds and the latest messages on their smartphones? It's so much easier for me to talk and follow what they, the president, the experts, my colleagues, are doing than to pay attention and talk about my own true life. Jesus then brings them back to themselves. What things were you talking about? And they respond, don't you see the news feeds? But Jesus doesn't want the news story. He wants their story. He wants them. And he invites them to give themselves to him by telling their story. So they give themselves to this stranger Jesus. They tell him their story. And it's only then, after they've given themselves to him, that Jesus gives his answers, interpreting for them the things written in all the scriptures. But that didn't work. The right answers that Jesus gave didn't work. They still don't recognize him. They get to their destination. Jesus continues to walk on, and they say, "No, stay with us. We feel like you know us, like there's a common union among us, between us." Now, as often is pointed out with this passage, Jesus shows up along the road in the crisis uninvited. But he waits. He waits to be invited into the house, into my life, into my crisis. Jesus takes his place at the table, and then he does what he does in every feeding story in the Gospels. It's what we still do today. He takes, blesses, breaks, and gives the bread to them. And their eyes are open, and they recognize him. Their crisis point has shifted. It is no longer the crucifixion that is their crisis, the crisis determining the trend of all their future events. It is now the taking, blessing, breaking, and giving. It is the Holy Communion with the stranger that will now determine the trend of all their future events. I don't want this pandemic to be the crisis determining my future. I want to give myself to the stranger, honestly telling my story. I want to invite the stranger in relationship, in common union with me and others. I want the crisis that determines my future to be Holy Communion, the taking and blessing and breaking and giving of ourselves, our souls, and bodies. That's why it's so important for me, even in this strange, weird Zoom church. It's why it's so important for me to offer the Easter crisis, the Holy Communion, a stage in a sequence of events at which the trend of all future events is determined. In God's name, amen.